Please welcome Ben Rossiter.
Thanks, Belinda. Yes, hopefully it's a slightly provocative title, but let's get started. The reason, what I really would like to talk about is, it is an election year and it's come to the end of the term of this government's term. So it's a really good time just to sit back and reflect and think about, where is walking today and, where is it going? And particularly when the government came in, there was a glimmer of hope that finally, after some years of neglect, possibly decades, that walking would get some love. And when the new government came in, the roads minister really was engaged, was interested, and I'm really quite pleased to say I've had lots of formal and informal meetings with him over the term of the government, which probably is in stark contrast to his predecessor in the coalition government, Terry Mulder, who unfortunately declined to meet the entire 4 years he was in office. So when the election came out, we had quite a bit of hope. But before I get into that, I'll just step back a bit and back to 2009. And a key thing for us was, I remember sitting in the office of an executive director in the Department of Transport who said, look, asking, Ben, what's our role? What's transport's role in walking? Because really, we see that as a local government issue. And we spoke about things like, the level of walking for transport, walking to school, walking to public transport, local trips, all those sort of things. And the growing congestion problem, that idea, well, you couldn't build more roads to solve congestion, because that's kind of like smoking to cure your lung cancer. It just makes it worse. And he sit back and, I had a lot of respect for him. He said, I tend to agree. Unfortunately, the minister of the time, Tim Pallas, he also agreed, and we started work on the pedestrian access strategy, which was then launched by the minister in August 2010 in rather inauspicious circumstances on a shared path in Burundara with just the minister, advisors, some bureaucrats, Burundara councillors and some officers and myself. No fanfare, no media, no nothing, and out in the shared path I kind of looked around and that was us, and I thought, that doesn't look really like it's going to be a major government announcement. But the important thing was we had a strategy. We had something we could build around over the longer term. There was actions, but no finance, no money, but there were clear actions. So we had a bit of optimism that come into the election, and forward there'd be budget bids around walking and walking for transport. But then, of course, the government lost the election, and it probably took, I think, the new government, Minister Mulder, probably about a year or so to realise he had a pedestrian strategy before it was quietly shelved and never to be seen of again. So just have some, then jump to today and have a look at the current context of how important, what is the significance of walking. And you'll see on the table behind me that in the recent cycling strategy, you can see that 17% of Melbourne's trips, transport trips, are done entirely on foot. 17%. That's more than bike, bus, tram and train combined. So walking is absolutely fundamental to our transport system. It's also, we could not have a public transport system without walking. Nearly 60% on average walk to train stations and over 90% to bus and trams. But it's not just transport, it's also in terms of physical activity and health. Walking is by far the most common physical activity by a country mile. Look at the green line as it goes up towards from mid-30s and peaks up around the mid-50s before dropping off. That's how popular walking is. Then another way of looking at it is walking in terms of our total physical activity. Combining recreational walking and transport walking, it accounts for over half the physical activity for the 25-year-olds and over. And even the 18 to 24 are nearly at 50% of their total physical activity is through walking. So then we go back to the election, and when the election happened, thinking we're finally in 2014 going to have some policy and investment in walking. And key plank was Active Transport Victoria, a unit within the department. And we argued for a pedestrian unit. We got an active transport unit, but that was something. And a unit that had $1.1 million a year for 3 years. And most of us in the sector are thinking, fantastic. We're going to have like half a dozen people. They're going to do some research. They're going to work across government. Going to see some change. But as many of you will know, Active Transport Victoria currently has 2 staff. And I don't think they're on $500,000 salary each year. So it's an election promise that was not delivered through the budget, but a reprioritisation through the existing departmental funds. It's kind of the yes minister approach. The next thing was the Safer Cycling and Pedestrian Fund, $100 million out of TAC money for cycling and pedestrian infrastructure. And despite 5 times as many pedestrians getting killed on our roads each year than cyclists, and twice as many seriously injured, over 70% of the money has gone to cycling. Now, we don't begrudge money being spent on cycling. In fact, we think there should be, hundreds of millions of dollars a year spent on cycling. But what we do begrudge or question is when we have walking and cycling together and walking consistently gets shortchanged. And this is something that happens in not just ATV, but a few years ago I reviewed local, state government and federal government strategies and policies investment around active transport and walking and cycling, and there was a really consistent theme, and that is what few dollars there were went to cycling and nice fluffy words for walking. And something that's going on at the moment, I've just popped up behind me, is the Australian Bicycle Council, which goes up through the state transport agencies to federal. It's been around for a long time. They've been mooting becoming the walking and cycling since at least 2011. I might add, without discussion or dialogue with walking agencies, and as you will know, Victoria Walks is the main one in the country, and they certainly haven't spoken to us. They've now got expressions of interest for this, and they've decided to become the Walking and Cycling Council and seek $200,000 of funds to have a secretariat. What's concerning for us, as you look at the bottom line, is even though they're doing that, it's going to be business as usual. And that business as usual is they're not going to do anything on walking for at least 2 years. So that's the concern within a policy context we have on all levels of government, although some local governments do it very well. Looking at a state level, I want to go to investment in recreational walking as the most common physical activity. Now, Sport and Recreation Victoria and the Minister answered a question in Parliament recently about investment in walking, and he said in the current period there's $220,000 a year in the current 3-year period on walking as the main recreational activity. And of that 220, a large chunk went to Outdoors Victoria. As far as I can work out, that's not walking specific. So it's probably an optimistic figure for Sport and Recreation Victoria, but also $1 million on trails and supporting trails around Victoria. And we don't know if that's $500,000 on the Grampians Peak Trail or how it is, but the bottom line is it's a bit more than $1.2 million a year over the period on the most popular recreational activity in Victoria. And women and walking, for those of you who were in the session just with Jan just before, I think that women and walking is particularly important because women walk nearly twice as much as men for recreation, but they also walk marginally more than men for transport. So it's their most popular form of physical activity, but they have significant barriers. And one of them is around harassment and threat of violence in the street. The government's done fantastic work in family violence area over the last 3 or 4 years, and violence against women, but we're not looking at investment around the ability to access public space and participate in the community. It's an area of work for the government and the community that seriously needs addressing. But there's some good things in there, and one of them is, Vic Health continues to invest in walking, whether it's Walk to School, which funds a lot of councils, Victoria Walks, Change to Walking and others, and that's probably at over $1.2 million a year. Parks Victoria, significant investment in parks and trails. Also, we're doing a partnership program, mapping some walks in parks, welcoming walks, particularly for women and the people for whom they care, so they can have walks in parks. The TAC SHRIP funding, the $35 million for safer local travel, is significant, and we really welcome the input of TAC over the last few years and increased their investment, and it's fantastic. And the department 20-minute neighbourhood pilot that we're involved in with 3 councils and the Heart Foundation. So there are some good things happening across other levels of government. What I want to go now is looking forward. What are the things some of the things we want to really see in the walking space? And this is by no means an exhausted list. There's things that I would like to think about, like particularly in growth suburbs. What are we doing about walkability and density across the whole network? But I think the first thing we'd like to see is a plan. is we think about a plan for walking, a strategy, a whole of government approach. Because if you think about walking, it cuts across so many areas of government, be it Treasury, be it health, it's an economics issue, be it health, education, local government, parks, sport, whatever, so many levels. We need to have a coordinated approach with clear actions, fundings and targets, like walk to school, like to public transport, short trips and recreational. And particularly, we want to see in these agencies have some pedestrian or walking expertise in-house. And what's surprising is that 17% of all Melbourne trips done on foot, that's 1 in 6 trips done on foot. There is not one officer anywhere in the state transport agencies who is devoted entirely to pedestrian issues. Not one. So it's like we have to build up that capacity internally. We also have to think about principal pedestrian networks and investing, and this builds on the work, I think, of Peter and Andrew this morning, but think about safe, convenient walking routes within 15 minutes of train stations, activity centres and schools, but taking a precinct approach. Not the piecemeal approach we do to there's a problem and we'll just pick out one little spot. Let's think about a precinct, but also those routes, because a walking route is only as good as its worst barrier. Addressing women's safety is absolutely critical. This is a campaign, also campaigning for blokes to change their behaviour. Men have to change their behaviour. We put up with a lot of harassment. We don't put up with harassment in a lot of professional environments, work and education. We shouldn't be putting up in the public sphere. So it's about making safe, appealing walking neighbourhood routes for women particularly. And that's what we've been doing in partnership with Maribyrnong in Let's Walk, working together with local community to try and map and promote some walks, particularly targeting women and those concerned with personal safety. So streets with good passive surveillance and shops and services and creche and school and that sort of thing on a route to try and populate them, because streets populated with women are obviously safer streets for women. Green walks, we know that green walking is particularly important. It's a motivator, so we need to invest in recreational walking. Every community should have at least one high quality green neighbourhood walk. And that's about state government stepping up and supporting the work that local councils have been doing. So the state has to take it from a health point of view and an economic point of view to make green walks in neighbourhoods. And safe streets for seniors and children. It's an economic imperative that we keep seniors active, healthy and walking as long as possible, particularly as the population ages. And we know from our research that we've had into senior pedestrian crashes that seniors are overrepresented in road stats. And the over 70 are 10% of the population, but they're 30% of pedestrian deaths. And they're not at fault in the vast majority of cases. It's not seniors doddery old seniors walking across a road. No, they are usually following the rules and crossing at the places they should be crossing. It's poor road design and bad driver behaviour. And of course, speed. So the state needs to get out of that speed debate it's been in and stopping when councils, particularly in communities, that want to lower speed, and they should allow them to do it, but also take the plunge and lower speeds across the network in high pedestrian and neighbourhood areas. Another one, I'm not going to concentrate too much on this because the session afterwards is going to look at it, but we need to invest in street trees. We need to go for a number of different reasons. We know walking amenity, it provides shade from the elements, combats climate change, even increases property values. And again, that's about funding councils to enable them to plant and maintain trees. And if that means dealing with utilities, that too. We need to massively green our urban areas for a variety of reasons. But also, and I'm just going to touch on a couple of things, what we'd like to see in investment and a strategy around that is some of the little things. And this is a little and a big thing. This is outside Flinders Street Station going to Fed Square. Busiest tram route in the world, probably the busiest stop, going for our busiest train station across a major tourism, Fed Square and off Birram Mar, across to the G. And that traffic light's there, and I've seen this happen too many times. You can have a senior, someone in their 70s or 80s, can start walking on green and it turns to green for cars before they've finished their trip across the crossing. And that's indicative. If we can't do it in the busiest spot in Melbourne, what does that say about how serious we are addressing it across the entire network, across the entire state? Where we all know what we really should be thinking about is, should we even have cars there at all in large chunks of the city? But we can't even do that there, so that's an indicative thing. Another thing which I'll just about finish on is around things like road rules. We know that our road rules need reviewing, give way in car parks and give way signs and the give way laws. There's a lot of road rules we need to look at, but also understanding of road rules and compliance. That chicken many drivers play with walkers, that they won't give way when turning right or left or whatever because they'll just force their way through. This was an image that Vic Rose put on their Facebook at the start of the year, and it was fantastic, and we were absolutely rapt and congratulate Vic Rose for doing it. It was just put it out there and ask people the question, who has priority? A, B, C, D or E, in what order? Now, you all have a bit of a look. Let's do some audience participation if you want to, okay? If you can, stand up if you want to be part of this. Don't be, come on, you're all chicken, aren't you? Because you don't know. If you're game enough, stand up so we can see who's going to say who's what. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we've got a few people. These are the ones who have the courage. I like this. Okay, the other ones have got no idea. We'll take it as okay. Right. I want you to put up your hand if you think A has priority. B, C, D, E. I knew it. You guys know. No, guys, you don't count. You're down there. Okay. A. Next one is who has priority between A, B, C, D. Okay, this is good. Who has priority between A, B, C? Sorry, A and B, you can sit down. So who has priority between A and B? A, B. The A sit down and the lucky, sorry. No, sorry, the B sit down. Sorry, stand up, I missed it. Just tricking. So let's say we have 4 people left in the room who got it right. And this is kind of what thanks guys. This is what happened on the Vic Roads website. About 80%, at least 80% we could see in nearly 2,000 comments got it absolutely wrong. And the most disturbing thing was nearly all of them got it wrong for walkers. They had walkers as the last one. The pedestrian was right down the bottom. And we're lucky we're in the space we should know, but the general public had absolutely no idea. But within that, there is one little bit of good news I'm just going to finish on, and that is we found the dog that ate the strategy. And the strategy, or the components of the strategy, because it was so complex, that poor little tyke is now so fat he can hardly walk. And the point, I think, really is if we don't start to do things like have a walking strategy, complex strategy across the whole of government, it's about livable communities, that's what's going to continue to happen to Victorians and waistlines, is they will continue to go, that we know that over 66% of adults overweight or obese and 25% of kids. We need a walking strategy amongst other strategies to really start to think about how we create livable communities. Thanks.